The grand crescent ballroom glowed under chandeliers that sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars, but Emma Calder felt none of the usual awe. She clutched the divorce papers in her trembling hands, her heart sinking with each passing second. 6 months pregnant, alone, and abandoned by Andrew Calder, the man who had promised her forever, she had never felt more powerless. Her stomach churned with equal parts fear and anger as she watched him laugh across the room with Chloe Vane, his new girlfriend, radiant and smug in a crimson dress. He didn't even glance at her, and that dismissal cut deeper than any harsh word ever could. Around her, Manhattan's elite whispered behind crystal champagne flutes, some pitying, some judging. Emma had arrived alone, vulnerable, dressed in the last elegant maternity gown she could afford, feeling like a ghost in a room built for power and privilege. The soft hum of classical music, the muted clink of silver, all of it felt surreal, like a scene designed to remind her of her failures. And yet, amidst the chaos, a single text buzzed through her phone. "Emma Calder, your jet is ready. Everything you need is waiting." Her breath caught. She hadn't arranged this. She hadn't told anyone she'd come tonight. The unknown sender was a lifeline, mysterious, timely, and impossible to ignore. Across the room, Andrew's laughter rang out, mocking her unspoken despair. Emma's hand hovered over the papers. "Sign now, and the life you once dreamed of ends completely." But before she could make that fateful mark, the doors opened. Ethan Mercer appeared, calm, commanding, his presence alone bending the attention of the room toward him. Every eye shifted, and Andrew froze, his smirk faltering, green eyes locked with hers, a silent signal of protection and opportunity. Emma felt the baby kick, a sudden surge of hope mixed with fear. All her humiliation, every sleepless night, and every tear shed in secret had brought her here to this exact moment. And as Andrew whispered, Emma Calder had always be. Andrew was E. Tonight, as Emma stood in the ballroom, memories of that life collided with her present. The opulent space gleamed with polished marble floors, golden accents, and crystal chandeliers hanging like constellations above the social elite. Servers glided between tables, carrying flutes of Dom Perignon, while guests whispered about business deals and upcoming mergers. The city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows stretched endlessly, a reminder of both wealth and power, things she had once shared with Andrew but now seemed forever out of reach. Emma's mind flashed back to the months leading up to this moment. She had discovered Andrew's betrayal when she found messages from Chloe Vane, his younger, polished socialite mistress. Each text, each photograph, stabbed her with disbelief. The small apartment they once shared had become a tomb of disappointment and shame, the walls echoing with the life she thought they were building together. She remembered the nights she cried quietly, clutching her swollen belly, whispering promises to the unborn child she would raise alone. Yet Emma was not without resilience. She had learned to navigate Manhattan's social circles quietly, observing, absorbing, and noting every opportunity. Ethan Mercer, the enigmatic CEO who had noticed her tenacity at a corporate gala months prior, had subtly reached out, offering guidance and an open door. He was her first real lifeline since Andrew's betrayal. A man whose influence and insight could provide more than money, he offered protection, mentorship, and a path to reclaiming what was stolen from her. Her gaze drifted across the room to the crowd. Investors in sleek suits, socialites in haute couture, and journalists scribbling notes were all part of the world she had once been part of. And now she would re-enter it not as Andrew's dependent wife, but as Emma Calder, a woman who refused to be humiliated. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly, feeling the life inside her, a reminder that she was not powerless. Her son would inherit strength, dignity, and a mother who would fight for justice, no matter the cost. As the orchestra began to play, Emma felt a surge of determination. The divorce papers in her hand were not just a symbol of loss, they were the beginning of a plan. She would rise from the shadows, rebuild her life, and ensure Andrew would never underestimate her again. The room buzzed with chatter, but Emma's focus narrowed. She saw Andrew laughing with Chloe, oblivious to what was coming, and for the first time in months, a flicker of satisfaction warmed her chest. Tonight was only the beginning. Emma's eyes met a subtle nod from Ethan Mercer at the edge of the crowd, a signal that the game had begun. And then, she noticed it, a camera flash aimed directly at her. Someone was watching, Someone would tell the world everything. The doors of the Grand Crescent Ballroom swung open with a quiet authority, and all eyes instinctively turned toward Andrew Calder. He moved with the ease of a man who believed he owned the world, his tailored Tom Ford suit hugging broad shoulders and the self-assured smile that had once won Emma's heart firmly in place. Beside him, Chloe Vane glided like a swan, every movement choreographed to perfection, her crimson gown catching the light and the envy of the room. The murmurs began immediately, Andrew's name whispered in a mixture of admiration and subtle judgment. He thought himself untouchable, a king in a room of sycophants. Emma felt her pulse spike, a combination of anger, fear, and adrenaline. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but reality was infinitely sharper. Every ounce of humiliation from the past months pressed against her chest, yet she held her head high. The ballroom was opulent, every surface polished marble, every centerpiece a reflection of wealth, power, and privilege. Crystal glasses glinted, golden candelabras rose like towers, and the soft music of a string quartet floated above the tension, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath. Every detail screamed Andrew's world, a world Emma had once been part of, now poised to witness his unraveling. Andrew's eyes swept the crowd and landed on her. For a fraction of a second, the arrogance faltered, replaced by confusion and something darker dread. He hadn't expected her here, pregnant, composed, and unbroken. Chloe's smile faltered as she noticed the change in the air, the sudden shift in attention. All around, Manhattan's elite were sensing the drama. Some raised eyebrows, some whispered, and one journalist discreetly raised a camera. Emma's presence alone was a statement, a silent yet piercing declaration. She was no longer the defeated, vulnerable wife she had been months ago. Then came the subtle movement that changed everything. Ethan Mercer, standing near the edge of the crowd, his green eyes locked on Emma. With a slight nod, he signaled readiness, the invisible shield of his presence amplifying her confidence. Andrew noticed it too, his composure cracking as he realized that Emma had an unseen ally, a powerful figure whose influence dwarfed his own, waiting silently to intervene. The room's whispers grew into a low hum of anticipation. The world had shifted on its axis, and Andrew was unprepared for the tremor that followed. Emma adjusted her gown and took a deliberate step forward. Her son kicked gently, reminding her of what she was fighting for, her resolve crystallizing. Every insult, every act of betrayal, every sleepless night had led to this, her reclamation of power in a room designed to showcase Andrew's dominance. Chloe's gaze flicked to Ethan, fear briefly replacing her practiced smugness. Andrew's hand tightened on hers, a futile attempt to assert control in a space he no longer commanded. And then, in a moment, suspended between disbelief and inevitability, a photographer's flash illuminated the ballroom. All eyes turned to Emma Calder. The woman who was supposed to be broken, humiliated, and powerless now held the room's attention, her presence commanding and radiant. Andrew's smirk froze mid-laugh. The whispers spread, building a wave of tension that could only lead to one outcome. Emma's eyes met Ethan's again, and for the first time, Andrew felt truly exposed, completely at her mercy. The orchestra's soft melody faltered as the whispers began to grow, a subtle tremor that rippled through the Grand Crescent Ballroom. Emma Calder stepped forward, her gown swaying like liquid sapphire, every eye now fixed on her. Andrew Calder, once the unchallenged center of attention, felt the room tighten around him, as if the very air had conspired against him. His smirk, which had carried him through countless social conquests, faltered. He hadn't anticipated Emma's presence, much less the confidence radiating from her every movement. Then came the first shock. A journalist discreetly approached, pressing a small recorder to Andrew's lapel. "Mr. Calder," the reporter whispered, "your wife is here." How do you respond?" Andrew blinked, caught mid-toast, the words faltering on his tongue. Chloe's hand gripped his arm tighter, the smile on her face wavering. Across the room, Ethan Mercer's presence was calm but formidable, a silent sentinel who shifted the balance. Every powerful executive and socialite in the room sensed the impending confrontation. Emma raised her hand, a simple gesture that commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Tonight, I am here to reclaim what was taken from me." Gasps and murmurs spread. Andrew's eyes widened, a faint sheen of sweat forming at his hairline. This was no ordinary confrontation. This was a declaration. The flash of cameras captured her every word, immortalizing the moment in frames that would soon circulate through every major news outlet. And then the twist, impossible, shocking, and utterly public. Emma revealed a tablet she had been carrying, projecting images for all to see. Screenshots of Andrew's messages with Chloe, receipts from extravagant trips, and a series of private contracts that exposed his financial manipulations. Each revelation landed like a hammer. The room's elite leaned in, whispers turning to audible murmurs of disbelief. Andrew staggered, Chloe's grip loosening as the facade of control crumbled. Emma's plan, months in the making, was executed with precision. She was not just a wronged wife, she was a strategist, a woman whose intellect and courage now dominated the ballroom. But the shocks didn't stop there. Emma turned to a group of investors who had long admired Andrew's empire and spoke directly into the microphone Ethan subtly handed her. Andrew Calder's deals, while glamorous, were built on deception. Investors, partners, and even family, you deserve to know the truth. The collective gasp rippled like a wave. Andrew's reputation, once pristine, now teetered on collapse. Chloe's smile vanished entirely. The red dress that had signaled dominance now seemed like a costume in a play she was no longer part of. The final twist came as Ethan Mercer stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Emma's shoulder. "Emma has my full support," he announced, the words deliberate, carrying authority and gravitas. Every eye registered the unspoken implication. Andrew was outmatched. Power had shifted irreversibly. Emma's hand instinctively rested on her baby bump, a reminder that her strength and future were inseparable. Andrew opened his mouth, words failing him, as the crowd digested the full scope of the humiliation and the public exposure. And then, the room fell into a stunned silence, one that held Andrew captive, Chloe, speechless, and Emma, finally, in control of the narrative she had fought so hard to reclaim. Even with the ballroom watching, Emma Calder could not ignore the weight pressing on her chest. Her hands shook slightly as she lowered the tablet, the room buzzing with whispers, camera flashes, and murmurs of disbelief. Publicly humiliating Andrew Calder had been a victory, yes, but the adrenaline that carried her through the confrontation began to fade, leaving a raw ache that reminded her of the months of betrayal, exhaustion, and uncertainty she had endured. The baby inside her kicked as if sensing her stress, and she took a deep breath, trying to regain composure. Backstage, away from the prying eyes, Emma sank onto a velvet settee, letting herself finally feel the crushing wave of isolation. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry, a mixture of relief, fear, and exhaustion flooding her. Ethan Mercer's presence was calm, almost paternal, but even he could not fully erase the invisible weight of her situation. Emma's body and mind were on the edge, reminding her that she was 6 months pregnant, alone, and now navigating a high-stakes social war she had only just entered. The private text messages she had received from Andrew's former business partners now seemed ominous. Some were congratulating him on surviving the immediate scandal, others subtly threatening to cut her off from her newfound influence. Chloe Vane's whispers to certain socialites were spreading like wildfire. Emma was being painted as reckless, unstable, even dangerous. Her reputation, though slowly rebuilding, was fragile, like a crystal glass teetering on the edge of a table. She realized that winning in public was only part of the battle. The private war, the one fought behind boardroom doors, was just beginning. Emma's thoughts drifted to her son, her unborn child, and the life she wanted to build for him, a world free from deceit, humiliation, and betrayal. She remembered the lonely nights of prenatal appointments, the nights spent working multiple jobs to save money, and the cold, empty apartment where she had learned to survive. And now, standing on the edge of a new empire she barely understood, the challenges seemed almost insurmountable. Andrew Calder had underestimated her before, but now, with wealth, influence, and allies she had yet to fully mobilize, the stakes had shifted. Yet fear, a quiet, gnawing fear, still clawed at her. Just as she was gathering herself, a discreet knock came at the side door. A junior associate from Ethan Mercer's firm entered, her face pale but determined. "Miss Calder," she whispered. "We've uncovered more of Calder's financial irregularities. Some of these could be useful if you plan to take further action." Emma's eyes lit up despite the fatigue. The revelation was staggering. Every ounce of doubt and despair she had felt began to morph into strategy. Her tears dried, replaced with the cold, precise focus that had always been part of her, lying dormant under years of love, loss, and betrayal. Emma stood, feeling the baby move inside her as if cheering her on. She knew the next steps would be dangerous. Andrew Calder was ruthless, Chloe vain, manipulative, and Manhattan's elite would not forgive easily. But she also knew one immutable truth. She was no longer powerless. She had allies, intelligence, and the fierce protection of the life growing within her. The private war had begun, and while her collapse had been temporary, her comeback would be unstoppable. As she walked back toward the ballroom, her hand rested protectively on her stomach, and she glanced at Andrew, who was still surrounded by whispers and suspicious glances. Emma's eyes narrowed, determination igniting. The next move would not be public humiliation. It would be strategic, irreversible, and the kind of twist that would leave him reeling. Emma Calder's mind raced as she stepped back into the ballroom, her heart still echoing from the weight of her temporary collapse. But she was not the same woman who had entered hours earlier. The adrenaline of exposure had faded, replaced by focus and precision. Ethan Mercer, standing discreetly near the corner, caught her eye. There was a subtle intensity in his gaze, something unspoken but unmistakably powerful. Tonight wasn't just about reclaiming dignity, it was about revealing the hidden currents of power, alliances, and secrets that could shift the balance entirely. A soft tap on her shoulder drew her attention. It was a junior associate from Ethan's firm, a young woman named Claire Donovan, her face taut with urgency. "Miss Calder," she whispered, "we've discovered that Andrew's financials are far messier than anyone knew. There are offshore accounts, fraudulent transfers, and hidden assets. If you act now, you can corner him completely before he even realizes what's happening." Emma's pulse quickened. This was the kind of advantage she had been waiting for, a key to undoing everything Andrew thought he controlled. Her mind flashed back to months of preparation, to Ethan's cryptic hints of mentorship and protection. He had been subtly guiding her all along, ensuring she had the tools to take back her life. She had thought of him as merely a benevolent ally, someone watching quietly from the shadows, but now it became clear. Ethan had a network, intelligence, and influence that dwarfed Andrew's empire. Every investor whisper, every boardroom murmur, every subtle nudge Emma had received had been orchestrated to empower her moment of triumph. Emma swallowed hard, letting the realization sink in. For the first time, the pieces of the puzzle aligned. Andrew Calder had underestimated not only her, but the quiet force standing beside her. Ethan was more than a benefactor. He was a partner, a strategist, a shield, and the public confrontation was only the beginning. The next steps would not be a mere reaction, they would be calculated, lethal to Andrew's ego and empire. The ballroom seemed to shrink around her as she observed Andrew now. He was attempting to laugh, attempting to regain composure, but the unease was visible. Investors leaned closer to one another. Journalists scribbled furiously, and Chloe Vane's confidence had begun to crack. Every subtle glance Emma received from Ethan was a reinforcement. She was not alone. The power she had once lacked was now tangible, ready to be wielded. Then Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Emma," he said, low enough for only her to hear, "there's something you should know about Andrew's operations. He's been hiding assets not just offshore, but also in corporate shells tied to our very circles. He believes you are weak, but we have the leverage. You will have your choice. Restore your reputation, reclaim your financial freedom, and even protect your son's future. The rest will unfold naturally." Emma felt a shiver run through her spine. The game had changed completely, and she held the winning cards. Her eyes swept across the crowd once more. Andrew's confident posture now seemed brittle, Chloe's composed mask faltering. For the first time, Emma felt not just the possibility of victory, but inevitability. With Ethan by her side, the knowledge of Andrew's secrets, and the leverage she had meticulously gathered, there was no turning back. The twist was irreversible. The powerless wife had become the architect of a reckoning that Andrew could neither predict nor prevent. Emma straightened her shoulders, resting her hand over her belly as the baby kicked an unspoken affirmation. Tonight, the true game had begun, and the first move was hers. Emma Calder left the ballroom that night with a purpose unlike anything she had felt before. The humiliation of Andrew Calder's betrayal still lingered, but it was now tempered by clarity. She knew the path forward would not be easy, yet she also understood something crucial. She had the leverage, the insight, and the network to take control of her life. Her unborn child kicked, as if affirming the decision she had just made. Emma's resolve solidified. This was the moment she would reinvent herself completely. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. She started with her image, understanding that perception was power in Manhattan society. Emma booked a consultation with a top stylist, carefully selecting attire that exuded sophistication without arrogance. Each outfit tailored dresses, luxurious silk blouses, and understated accessories from Tiffany and Cartier was a statement. Emma was present, powerful, and unassailable. Her reflection in the mirror no longer revealed the broken, tearful woman of months past. Instead, a poised, confident figure emerged, every detail meticulously curated for maximum impact. Next came strategy. Emma spent hours with Ethan Mercer and his legal team, reviewing Andrew's financial dealings, contracts, and hidden investments. The revelations were staggering. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and manipulated assets that Andrew believed she would never uncover. Emma realized she had a treasure trove of leverage, enough to not only protect herself and her unborn child, but also to publicly reclaim the narrative. Each document she examined, every hidden email she decrypted, strengthened her sense of purpose and her desire for justice. Beyond finance and appearance, Emma worked on her voice and presence. She practiced confident gestures, polished public speaking, and rehearsed how to navigate high-profile events. The goal was clear: to appear unshakable, to make Andrew and Chloe's facade crumble, and to impress Manhattan's elite without arrogance, only command. Her meetings at Mercer Global with Ethan were intensive, blending corporate strategy with social maneuvering, a chess game where every move mattered. Even her personal life demanded attention. Emma knew that to win fully, she had to be strong emotionally. She consulted a therapist, managing the trauma of betrayal, learning to channel her anger into focused determination. The process was grueling. Tears and frustration surfaced regularly, but each session built resilience. Emma's mental fortitude became a secret weapon, her silent strength empowering her at every encounter. Then came the final touch. Subtle yet powerful alliances. Ethan introduced her to key investors, social influencers, and media contacts, each connection a potential domino that could amplify Andrew's downfall. Every handshake, every smile, every strategic conversation was a step toward reclaiming what she had lost. Emma realized that luxury, influence, and intelligence could combine to create an aura impossible to ignore, a presence that could not be dismissed. The transformation was almost complete when she returned to her apartment overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city's glittering lights, reflecting the life she was about to reclaim. Emma touched her baby bump, whispering, "We're ready." Every ounce of fear, every tear shed, had been transformed into power. Tomorrow, she would step back into the world, and this time, no one would underestimate her. And then, just as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Are you ready for the first move? Everything begins tonight." The night of the Metropolitan Crescent Gala arrived, a dazzling display of Manhattan wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over marble floors, servers glided past with trays of Dom Perignon, and the city skyline twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows. Emma Calder entered with calm precision, her sapphire gown clinging perfectly to her form, a subtle statement of elegance and authority. The whispers began immediately. Her presence alone was enough to shift the energy of the room. Andrew Calder, already surrounded by Chloe Vane and a group of sycophantic investors, noticed her instantly. His confident smile faltered ever so slightly as the crowd seemed to redirect their attention, a subtle but undeniable acknowledgement of Emma's emergence. Chloe's grip on his arm tightened, her own composure faltering as she sensed the shift. Manhattan's elite were watching closely, their murmurs blending into a wave of anticipation. Andrew had believed he could dominate this evening. Now, the stakes had shifted. Emma's gaze met Ethan Mercer's across the room, a silent signal of readiness. She had prepared meticulously every document, every piece of evidence, every connection she had built over the past months. Tonight was the moment of first strike. and she intended to wield it with precision. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with focused determination. Her unborn child moved within her, a reminder of what and who she was fighting for. As she approached the center of the room, the soft clinking of glasses paused. Emma raised her voice, clear and unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to draw your attention for just a moment," she began. The room fell silent, every eye drawn to her, including Andrew's. A faint tremor passed through him, subtle but unmistakable. He had underestimated her before, and now he could see that the woman he had discarded was far from powerless. With a gesture, she activated the presentation Ethan had discreetly set up. Screens illuminated with screenshots of Andrew's hidden accounts, financial manipulations, and private emails. Investors leaned in, murmuring. As the evidence unfolded publicly, Chloe Vane's confident smile dissolved into panic, and Andrew's face paled, the first signs of genuine vulnerability flashing across features he had always thought unassailable. Emma's plan was not just exposure, it was a demonstration of control and intelligence, executed flawlessly on the world stage. Gasps and whispers swept through the room. One prominent investor leaned toward another, clearly reconsidering Andrew's credibility. Emma's calm, measured explanations highlighted each misstep he had made, each deception, and the consequences of his actions. She didn't shout or attack personally, she presented facts with authority, letting the evidence speak for itself. By the end of her brief address, Andrew was trapped in the room's collective judgment. Chloe clutched his arm, powerless, as he attempted a half-smile that betrayed nothing but fear. Emma's gaze met Ethan's again. A subtle nod, and the moment was sealed. The first move in her calculated comeback had been executed, leaving Andrew destabilized in public, his carefully curated reputation now under scrutiny. Emma's own reputation, by contrast, had been elevated, her composure, intelligence, and grace on display for all Manhattan to witness. The baby kicked again, and she smiled, a quiet affirmation that she was fighting not just for herself, but for the life growing inside her. As the orchestra resumed, Andrew sank slightly into his chair, his public confidence shattered, and Emma realized this was only the beginning. The night had proven one truth: power had shifted, and she was no longer a woman to be underestimated. The city lights of Manhattan glimmered like 1,000 diamonds as Emma Calder stepped out of the sleek black Mercedes at the rooftop gala of Mercer Global. The wind tugged gently at her sapphire gown, but she remained poised, every step radiating the confidence that had taken months to cultivate. Tonight was not just another public appearance. It was a calculated move in a chess game that Andrew Calder had no idea she was playing. Every influential executive, investor, and socialite attending was now part of her arena, and she intended to dominate it. Inside, the room was alive with chatter, champagne flutes clinking, and the faint hum of a string quartet. Andrew Calder had arrived early, expecting to command attention as he always did. He had prepared his speech, practiced his smile, and positioned Chloe Vane like a jewel on his arm. But as soon as Emma entered, the energy shifted. Heads turned, whispers rose, and Andrew's smile tightened. For the first time, he felt the unnerving awareness that he was no longer the center of control. Emma moved confidently through the crowd, her eyes scanning the room. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The press had been subtly tipped off, ensuring photographers were strategically positioned. Key investors had been discreetly informed of Andrew's previous missteps, creating a ripple of anticipation. And behind it all, Ethan Mercer's calm, watchful presence reinforced that Emma was no longer alone in this fight. She was armed with knowledge, strategy, and undeniable power. A sudden hush fell over the terrace as Emma raised her glass, her voice cutting through the murmurs with clarity and authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "tonight we celebrate more than just success. Tonight we acknowledge integrity, foresight, and accountability, qualities that, unfortunately, have been overlooked in certain circles." Cameras flashed, capturing every word, every measured gesture. Andrew's face drained of color, Chloe's confident posture faltering. The audience, sensing the drama, leaned in with rapt attention. Emma tapped the tablet at her side, projecting detailed documents and financial charts onto a screen that overlooked the skyline. Offshore accounts, manipulated transfers, and hidden investments all came into focus. The murmurs intensified, and Andrew's voice faltered when he attempted to interject. Chloe's hand shook slightly, betraying her composure. Every guest in the room now understood the depth of Andrew's deceit, and Emma's meticulous preparation had ensured that there was no escape, no spin, no mitigation. Then came the twist that no one expected. One of Andrew's most trusted board members, previously aligned with him, discreetly stepped forward to confirm the authenticity of Emma's evidence, exposing Andrew's vulnerabilities in real time. Gasps echoed, and Andrew's panic became visible to all. He had relied on loyalty and fear to maintain control, but Emma had turned his own network against him, silently, strategically, and completely. Emma's hand rested lightly on her baby bump, a symbol of her future and her strength. "This is not personal," she said, her eyes locking with Andrew's. "This is about accountability. It's about ensuring that the next generation, including my son, grows up in a world where actions have consequences." The room erupted into applause, some tentative, some impressed, but all acknowledging her authority. Andrew's jaw tightened, his world crumbling in front of Manhattan's elite. Emma had not only reclaimed her narrative, she had flipped the power dynamic entirely. And as she glanced at Ethan Mercer, a subtle, knowing smile passed between them, signaling that the next moves in this game would be even more decisive. The morning after the gala, sunlight spilled across the Mercer Global penthouse, reflecting off floor-to-ceiling windows and the glittering Manhattan skyline. Emma Calder sat at the breakfast table, her sapphire gown replaced by a simple yet elegant blouse, her mind racing through every moment of the previous night. Andrew Calder's public humiliation had been meticulous, but the journey wasn't over. Every document, every revelation, every ally had been a step toward reclaiming her life, and now, an unexpected twist was about to elevate her victory beyond imagination. Her phone buzzed. A video call from her son, Oliver. Emma's heart swelled as she answered, his tiny face appearing, eyes bright and curious. "Mommy," he shouted, clutching his favorite stuffed bear. Her smile softened, the weight of months of stress melting away for a fleeting moment. "Hey, my love," she cooed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Then Oliver's gaze shifted subtly to a shadow behind him, a tall figure, composed with a reassuring presence. "Daddy?" he asked hesitantly. Emma froze. The word wasn't directed at Andrew. It was at Ethan Mercer, standing silently, a hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. The room seemed to still. Emma blinked, her chest tightening with emotion she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. Oliver, 6 months old, yet astonishingly perceptive, had instinctively recognized the warmth, protection, and honesty in Ethan. The very man who had guided Emma, shielded her from financial ruin, and helped orchestrate her return to power, was now being called Dad by the child she had fought to protect. Ethan looked down at the boy, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, and nodded. "That's right, Oliver," he said gently. "I've got you." Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a rush of gratitude, relief, and triumph flooding through her. Meanwhile, Andrew Calder had just arrived at his office, unaware that the next chapter of his downfall had begun. Reports of his mismanaged finances and last night's public exposure had already reached the board members, who were calling for emergency meetings. The ripple effects of Emma's strategy were visible everywhere. Investors shifting allegiances, Chloe Vane's influence waning, and Andrew's carefully constructed empire teetering on the edge. Manhattan gossip columns were ablaze with headlines of his humiliation, and social media amplified every detail, turning the tide irrevocably in Emma's favor. Back in the penthouse, Emma took a deep breath and looked at Ethan, who had returned to his discreet role in the background. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a quiet, knowing smile. "You did the hard work," he said. "I just made sure you had the tools to win." Emma realized that this was more than justice. It was the affirmation of her strength, intelligence, and perseverance. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt a sense of true victory that couldn't be stolen, measured, or undermined. Oliver laughed, reaching for both Emma and Ethan, bridging the new family connection effortlessly. The child's simple, honest acknowledgement of trust and love became a symbol of triumph for Emma. Andrew Calder could attempt to reclaim his reputation, his wealth, or his pride, but Emma had achieved something far greater: security, recognition, and a family founded on loyalty and integrity. Her power was no longer theoretical. It was embodied in the life she had nurtured, the alliances she had built, and the respect she now commanded in Manhattan society. As Emma held Oliver close, the city stretched endlessly beyond the windows, glittering with possibility, and she realized the full magnitude of her victory. Andrew's empire may have been vast, but he had underestimated a woman with strategy, courage, and an unwavering sense of justice, and the result was complete. Tonight, they all would remember who truly commanded the power. The morning sunlight filtered through the glass walls of Emma Calder's new office, the sleek Manhattan penthouse now transformed into her personal command center. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline, a reminder of the empire she was about to command. Charts, reports, and financial statements lay neatly on her polished desk, and the hum of corporate activity below was a constant pulse of opportunity. Emma had spent months preparing for this moment, turning knowledge into leverage, strategy into execution. She was no longer just a wronged wife, she was a force in Manhattan business, a rising figure impossible to ignore. Andrew Calder, in stark contrast, sat in his once commanding office, papers scattered, phone calls ignored, and a growing sense of panic settling in. The fallout from the gala and Emma's public exposure of his financial misdeeds had triggered a wave of instability. Investors were calling for accountability, partners were questioning their allegiance, and media outlets were dissecting every action he had taken. Every carefully constructed layer of Andrew's life was unraveling, leaving him exposed in a way he had never experienced before. His confidence, the armor he had worn for years, was gone. Emma's day was a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategic negotiations. She met with investors who had previously aligned with Andrew, presenting a vision that combined integrity, innovation, and security. Her clarity of thought and unshakable composure impressed even the most skeptical partners. Using the intelligence Ethan Mercer had provided, she exposed discrepancies in Andrew's empire to key stakeholders subtly, framing them as opportunities rather than attacks. Every interaction was calculated, every word chosen to reinforce her newfound authority. Her assistant, Claire Donovan, discreetly handed her new evidence of Andrew's offshore activities. Emma smiled faintly, reviewing the documents and planning her next steps. The irony was not lost on her. While Andrew had spent years believing he could manipulate and dominate, it was now Emma who held the power, the knowledge, and the influence. Her confidence grew with every phone call, every nod of approval from the board, and every step that cemented her presence as a serious player in the corporate world. Meanwhile, Andrew's personal life was crumbling. Chloe Vane's charm had faded under scrutiny, and her loyalty wavered as the media frenzy continued. Friends and colleagues once eager to flatter him now whispered doubts, and Andrew felt the isolation he had inflicted on Emma months ago with sharp clarity. Each failed call, every hesitant meeting, reminded him that he had underestimated the woman he had betrayed. The world he believed he controlled was no longer his playground, it was Emma's arena. Back in her office, Emma's phone buzzed with a video call from her son, Oliver. His laughter, pure and innocent, was a grounding force. Emma realized that her victories were not just professional, they were deeply personal. She had rebuilt a life that protected her child, secured her influence, and reclaimed her dignity. Her smile softened, a mixture of satisfaction and determination. Andrew might have power, wealth, and ambition, but Emma had something far stronger. Strategy, support, and a sense of justice that no one could undermine. By the afternoon, the city seemed to respond to her presence. Investors confirmed meetings, journalists reached out for commentary, and Andrew's attempts at damage control were futile. Emma leaned back in her chair, hand resting gently on her baby bump, and reflected on the reversal of fortune. The former tyrant of her life was now the one struggling to survive, while she navigated every challenge with elegance, intelligence, and quiet ferocity. And just as she prepared for the evening briefing with Mercer Global, a discreet alert flashed across her tablet. Andrew had made a desperate move, one that could either backfire spectacularly or expose him completely. Emma's eyes narrowed. The next wave of the battle was about to begin. The afternoon sun cast a harsh glare on Andrew Calder's office, highlighting the tension that had grown like a storm cloud over the past weeks. He had spent the morning scrambling, calling lawyers, investors, and media contacts, desperately attempting to regain control over the narrative Emma Calder had meticulously rewritten. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed the evidence she had made public. The humiliation at the gala had been one thing, but now the full weight of Manhattan's elite was beginning to turn against him. Every misstep he tried to cover only made him more exposed. Chloe Vane hovered nearby, her carefully curated confidence crumbling under the pressure. "Andrew," she whispered, "maybe we can spin it somehow? Maybe deny the documents?" Andrew's jaw tightened. Denial had never worked against Emma before, and it certainly wouldn't work now. He realized the woman he had dismissed, betrayed, and abandoned had not only survived but thrived, turning every weakness into leverage. His empire, once secure, now teetered on the edge, and every attempt to reclaim authority only magnified his vulnerability. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Emma was already steps ahead. In the quiet luxury of her Mercer Global office, she reviewed Andrew's latest desperate moves. His attempts to rally investors, challenge her evidence, and regain public favor were documented meticulously. She smiled faintly, knowing every action he took was predictable, and she had already prepared countermeasures. Emma wasn't reacting, she was orchestrating. Her ally, Ethan Mercer, had provided insights into Andrew's networks, highlighting the exact points where he was most vulnerable. By late afternoon, Emma convened a private board meeting with key investors and strategic partners. She revealed a series of newly discovered financial discrepancies, hidden contracts, and legally enforceable agreements that Andrew had overlooked. Each revelation landed like a calculated blow, and the investors' reactions confirmed what Emma had anticipated. Andrew's credibility was collapsing. Her calm, authoritative presentation left no room for denial or manipulation. The power in the room had shifted entirely, and Emma could feel it settling in her favor. Then came the twist. Emma released a confidential letter, subtly copied to the media, which Andrew had signed years ago but assumed destroyed. The letter contained clauses that directly challenged his control over multiple properties and assets tied to Mercer Global's allied ventures. Andrew had no legal recourse, and the letter became public knowledge almost instantly. Chloe's eyes widened, realizing that their last hope of containment had evaporated. Andrew's face paled, the full magnitude of Emma's strategic foresight finally hitting him. He had been beaten not by emotion, but by precision, intelligence, and timing. Emma's hand rested over her baby bump, the life within a symbol of everything she fought to protect. She had turned humiliation, betrayal, and fear into power, and now every attempt at retaliation by Andrew only exposed him further. She glanced at Ethan, who nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the perfect execution. Manhattan's elite were watching, documenting, and absorbing every detail. Andrew's empire of perception and influence was unraveling publicly, while Emma's credibility, grace, and strategic prowess were soaring higher than ever. And as Andrew stumbled to respond, realizing that every move he made was anticipated, Emma understood something crucial. The game was no longer about revenge, it was about total control, about rewriting the rules entirely. Tonight, Manhattan would remember who truly commanded the boardroom. The night air of Manhattan was electric, the city skyline ablaze with lights, as Emma Calder arrived at the exclusive Westwood Charity Gala. She stepped out of a black Mercedes, her sapphire gown shimmering under the cameras and paparazzi flashes. Every step she took exuded confidence and command, a silent announcement that she was no longer the woman Andrew Calder had dismissed and betrayed. Tonight was the culmination of months of preparation, strategy, and carefully calculated patience. Inside the gala, the elite of Manhattan mingled under golden chandeliers, crystal glasses in hand, and whispers of the previous scandal still floating through the room. Andrew sat across the room, visibly tense, Chloe Vane's hand gripping his arm as if to anchor him to a reality he no longer controlled. Investors and socialites exchanged glances, subtle but loaded with meaning. The tides had shifted, and Andrew was acutely aware of it. Emma's presence alone was a statement of power. Her meticulous preparation had ensured that every detail from lighting to camera angles highlighted her dominance. Emma approached the stage, her sapphire gown flowing elegantly. A hush fell over the crowd as she raised her glass and smiled calmly. "Tonight, we celebrate integrity and accountability," she began, her voice clear and resonant. "But we must also acknowledge the cost of deception and betrayal." The room leaned in, cameras capturing every word, every poised gesture. Andrew's confident smile faltered as the first shockwaves rippled through the gala. Emma unveiled the final piece of evidence, a meticulously prepared report of Andrew's misappropriated assets, concealed accounts, and corporate manipulations. The report was projected onto a large screen, every number, every transaction, meticulously documented. Gasps swept the room. Investors exchanged urgent whispers, some shifting allegiances quietly, while others took notes for follow-up action. Chloe's hand trembled on Andrew's arm. Her composure was gone. Andrew, realizing the depth of exposure, tried to intervene, but his attempts were futile. Emma had anticipated every possible reaction, every maneuver he might attempt, and had already prepared her counters. The evidence left no room for denial, no space to manipulate the narrative. Andrew's empire of perception and control was crumbling in real time. And then came the twist that no one expected. Emma invited Ethan Mercer to the stage. Standing beside her, he nodded toward Andrew. Emma has not only uncovered the truth, he said, but she has also secured the future for her family and the integrity of every partner here tonight. His words, deliberate and commanding, amplified the humiliation. Andrew's shoulders slumped slightly, his face pale under the gala lights. Every ally he had relied on now understood that Emma's influence had surpassed his own, and the exposure was absolute. Emma rested a hand lightly on her baby bump, a subtle yet powerful symbol of the new life and future she protected. "This is not revenge," she continued. "This is justice, and a demonstration that deceit has consequences." The audience erupted into applause, recognizing both her courage and her strategic brilliance. Andrew's attempts to reclaim authority, to explain or rationalize, fell flat. The board members, investors, and socialites in the room had witnessed the undeniable shift of power. By the end of the night, Andrew Calder had lost credibility, influence, and social standing. Chloe Vane quietly slipped away, her own ambitions collapsing alongside his. Emma had not only reclaimed her dignity but solidified her power and autonomy, proving to Manhattan and herself that betrayal could be countered with intelligence, patience, and courage. As she left the stage, Ethan at her side and cameras following, Emma knew that the final chapter was approaching. Andrew's empire had fallen, and her own rise was unstoppable. The crowd watched, riveted, as the woman once abandoned had become the ultimate victor. The morning sun glinted off the mirrored windows of Mercer Global, casting streaks of gold across the boardroom, where Emma Calder now presided with effortless authority. Months of meticulous planning, strategic maneuvering, and unwavering determination had brought her to this pinnacle. Investors, board members, and industry leaders sat before her, waiting for her guidance. The energy in the room was electric, a testament to the shift that had taken place. Emma Calder was no longer just Andrew Calder's former wife. She was a commanding presence in Manhattan's corporate elite. Andrew Calder, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale. His once vaunted empire teetered, partnerships dissolved, and media scrutiny intensified. The humiliation of the gala, compounded by Emma's strategic exposure of his misdeeds, left him isolated. Chloe Vane had vanished from the social scene, her ambitions crushed along with Andrew's credibility. Manhattan's elite no longer whispered about Andrew's achievements. They discussed his downfall, a stark contrast to Emma's ascent. Every failed attempt he made to reclaim control only solidified her dominance. Emma's day was a symphony of power. She signed contracts that restructured key partnerships in her favor, met with international investors who previously hesitated to engage, and presented expansion plans for Mercer Global with clarity and precision that left no room for doubt. Her reputation for intelligence, strategic thinking, and resilience preceded her. Each handshake, each nod, each carefully worded sentence cemented her authority. Emma was no longer responding to circumstances. She was shaping them. A discreet alert on her tablet brought her attention to Andrew's latest desperate maneuver. He had attempted to leverage a minor shareholder against her, hoping to destabilize her influence. Emma's lips curved into a faint smile. Every move he made was anticipated, every reaction mapped out. Using the evidence she had carefully gathered, she countered publicly in the press, turning his attempt into a reaffirmation of her competence. Manhattan's elite watched in awe as Emma transformed Andrew's last-ditch effort into a testament to her strategic brilliance. Her personal life flourished in parallel. Oliver, now thriving and full of curiosity, bonded effortlessly with Ethan Mercer, who had become a steadfast ally and a supportive figure in their lives. Emma's home, once a symbol of loneliness and betrayal, was now filled with laughter, warmth, and the security she had fought to achieve. The baby, the child who had given her the motivation to rise above Andrew's deceit, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. That evening, at a celebratory dinner overlooking Central Park, Emma addressed a group of industry leaders and friends. "Power," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "is not about wealth alone. It's about integrity, foresight, and the courage to act when others falter. I have learned that resilience is forged in adversity, and that true leadership emerges when one refuses to be defined by betrayal." Applause filled the room, genuine and admiring, reinforcing the fact that Emma had achieved not only victory but recognition, respect, and authority. As she looked out over the city lights, hand resting on her stomach, Emma realized the full scope of her triumph. Andrew's downfall, Chloe's retreat, and the public acknowledgement of her intelligence and resilience marked a definitive turn. She had reclaimed her life, her power, and her dignity. Every obstacle had been transformed into opportunity, every betrayal into strategy, every tear into determination. Manhattan had witnessed her rise, and no one would forget it. And in that moment, with the skyline glittering and her allies beside her, Emma Calder knew that the next chapter of her life was hers, to write unstoppable, unshakable, and undeniably victorious. The Manhattan skyline glittered beneath the dusk sky as Emma Calder stepped onto the terrace of her Mercer Global penthouse. The city, alive with lights and motion, felt like a reflection of her triumph. Andrew Calder, once the architect of her misery, was now nothing more than a shadow in her memory. His empire had crumbled under scrutiny, his alliances dissolved, and Chloe Vane had vanished into obscurity. Manhattan had watched his downfall unfold with awe, and Emma's rise had become the story that defined the season. Oliver giggled nearby, his tiny hands gripping Ethan Mercer's fingers as the two played on a plush rug in the corner. Emma watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of love, pride, and relief. The months of strategic planning, public confrontations, and personal sacrifices had led to this moment: her son safe, her power solid, and her life reclaimed. She had achieved what Andrew never could: respect, authority, and the love of those who mattered most. The final blow to Andrew had come earlier that day. Investors had publicly severed ties, media outlets had exposed his financial mismanagement in detail, and former colleagues had quietly withdrawn support. Every attempt he had made to regain control backfired spectacularly, leaving him isolated and humiliated. Manhattan's elite now whispered not about his accomplishments, but about his spectacular failure, a lesson in arrogance, betrayal, and the consequences of underestimating those he had wronged. Emma, meanwhile, had spent the morning consolidating her gains. Contracts were finalized, new partnerships forged, and plans for expansion outlined with precision. Ethan Mercer, her steadfast ally and now more than just a supporter, stood by her side as they reviewed the latest financial reports. Every line confirmed the irreversible shift. Emma's influence, her authority, and her legacy were now unassailable. Andrew's empire, once towering, had become a cautionary tale. Yet the true victory was personal. Oliver's laughter echoed through the penthouse, a reminder that triumph was not only about business or reputation, but about family, love, and security. Emma held her son close, feeling the warmth and life that had fueled her every decision. Ethan stood beside her, a subtle smile on his face, acknowledging the bond that had grown through shared strategy, respect, and unwavering support. In that quiet moment, the world's chaos receded, leaving only love and accomplishment. Later that evening, Emma hosted a small gathering on her terrace. Influential figures, allies, and friends celebrated her rise, applauding her intelligence, resilience, and courage. The night sky, ablaze with city lights, mirrored the brilliance of her achievements. Andrew's attempts to disrupt, to challenge, and to reclaim any part of his former power were meaningless. He had lost everything, while Emma had gained control, respect, and the life she deserved. As she watched Oliver fall asleep in Ethan's arms, Emma realized the depth of her victory. She had turned betrayal into strategy, humiliation into triumph, and fear into determination. Manhattan had witnessed the full arc. A woman abandoned, betrayed, and underestimated had risen, orchestrated justice, and built a future filled with love, power, and security. And in the quiet of the penthouse, the city stretching endlessly below, Emma Calder smiled, knowing that Andrew's fall was complete, her son was safe, and her life had been reclaimed in every sense, personal, professional, and emotional. The sun rose over Manhattan, casting golden light across the city that seemed to celebrate Emma Calder's triumph. From her penthouse terrace, she watched the skyline shimmer, a reflection of the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. Months of strategy, planning, and courage had led to this moment. Andrew Calder's downfall was complete. Chloe Vane had disappeared from the social scene. And every investor, ally, and observer recognized Emma's authority, intelligence, and resilience. Inside the penthouse, Oliver played on the plush carpet, laughter ringing through the space. Emma's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. The journey had been long filled with betrayal, humiliation, and doubt, but it had shaped her into a woman stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. Ethan Mercer stood nearby, quietly observing, the subtle warmth in his eyes reflecting their partnership, trust, and growing bond. Emma realized that happiness was not only about triumph over her enemies, but about the love and security she had cultivated for her family. The city outside was alive with possibility, but within these walls, Emma had created a sanctuary. The penthouse, once empty and cold, was now filled with warmth, laughter, and the energy of a life reclaimed. Every luxury detail from the Cartier watch Ethan had subtly gifted her as a congratulatory gesture, to the Tiffany necklace resting on her dresser was a symbol of power, independence, and the rewards of resilience. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the first unguarded moment in months. Later that afternoon, Emma held a private lunch with key allies and investors who had supported her rise. Their admiration was genuine, not performative. Each handshake, nod, and congratulatory word reinforced her authority and reminded her that her victories were well earned. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "You've done more than reclaim what was taken, you've reshaped everything." Emma nodded, aware that this affirmation was more valuable than any financial or social gain. It was proof that her strategy, courage, and integrity had been recognized. As evening approached, Emma prepared for a quieter celebration. A small gathering of close friends, Oliver and Ethan, marked the true personal triumph. Candles flickered softly across the room, and the city lights outside twinkled like stars. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to reflect on the journey, the betrayals that had once threatened to break her, the public humiliations, and the countless strategic moves that had flipped the game entirely. Every tear, every sleepless night, every calculated risk had led to this moment of profound fulfillment. Oliver crawled into her lap, resting his tiny head against her shoulder. "Mommy, we're happy," he said simply, his innocence a reminder of why every fight had mattered. Emma kissed the top of his head, tears of joy filling her eyes. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her back, a quiet affirmation of support and partnership. Manhattan might have witnessed Andrew's downfall, but Emma's true victory was far more intimate: security, love, and the unshakable knowledge that she had built a life worth protecting. As the night deepened, Emma stood on the terrace once more, Oliver in her arms and Ethan at her side. The city stretched endlessly before them, glittering and alive. For the first time, she felt complete not just in power, but in heart. Andrew Calder was a memory, the past fully behind her, and Emma's life, her family, and her happiness were now hers entirely. The story of betrayal had transformed into a legacy of triumph, and Manhattan would never forget the rise of Emma Calder. The winter sun cast a warm glow over the Calder-Mercer penthouse, illuminating the room with a soft, golden hue. Manhattan stretched endlessly below, a city of endless possibility, reflecting the life Emma Calder had built for herself. Months of relentless strategy, confrontations, and clever maneuvers had led to this calm, yet powerful moment. Andrew Calder's attempts at recovery had failed, Chloe Vane had vanished from the social scene, and Emma's name resonated throughout the city as a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and integrity. Emma sat comfortably on the cream-colored sofa, her hands resting gently on her now slightly larger baby bump. Oliver played at her feet, laughter filling the room like music. His joy, innocent and genuine, was the ultimate reward for every struggle she had endured. Emma's eyes softened as she watched him construct towers from blocks, each one carefully balanced, a reflection of the careful planning and effort she had invested in her life. Across the room, Ethan Mercer poured coffee, the aroma mingling with the crisp winter air coming through the open windows. Ethan approached, offering her a cup. "You've done it, Emma," he said, his voice calm but filled with admiration. "You've turned every obstacle into opportunity, every betrayal into leverage." Emma smiled, sipping her coffee. She reflected on the months of public confrontations, boardroom battles, and strategic alliances that had brought her here. Each challenge, each moment of fear or doubt, had been transformed into a step toward this moment of security, happiness, and undeniable triumph. The family's warmth was mirrored in their social sphere. Investors she had courted now respected her acumen, colleagues admired her resilience, and friends who had supported her quietly celebrated her rise. Manhattan's elite no longer saw her as a victim but as a leader, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity and power while nurturing the life she valued most. The combination of personal and professional triumph created a rare equilibrium. Emma had achieved success without sacrificing the elements of life that truly mattered. Oliver toddled toward Ethan, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Dad, look!" he exclaimed, holding a small block in triumph. Emma laughed, her heart swelling with joy. Ethan knelt, lifting the boy gently, a quiet confirmation that their bond was secure, unshakable, and loving. Emma watched them, understanding that her strategy had extended beyond business. It had built a family grounded in trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. The life she had fought for was now tangible, thriving in every small detail. Even the skyline outside seemed to acknowledge her victory. Lights reflected off the river, skyscrapers gleamed like beacons of achievement, and the city's pulse mirrored the rhythm of her own heart, steady, confident, and filled with promise. Emma knew that the story of betrayal, humiliation, and struggle had ended, replaced by a narrative of triumph, love, and power. Every challenge had averted disaster and produced growth. Every tear had fueled determination, and every calculated risk had led to lasting fulfillment. As night fell, Emma stood on the terrace, Oliver in her arms, Ethan at her side. The lights of Manhattan stretched like a carpet of stars beneath them. She held her son close, feeling the life she had nurtured and protected. For the first time in years, Emma Calder allowed herself to feel fully, completely, and unshakably happy. Andrew's shadow was gone, her power undisputed, and her family secured. The city would remember her story, not for the betrayal she endured, but for the resilience, brilliance, and courage that transformed her life. And as the wind carried the soft sounds of the city into their penthouse, Emma knew that every tear, every plan, every strategic move had led to this perfect equilibrium, a life of love, power, and unassailable happiness. With the future wide open before them, the first light of morning reflected off the polished glass of Mercer Global Tower, illuminating the city in a soft golden glow. Emma Calder stepped into her office, the atmosphere calm yet charged with potential. Over the past year, she had transformed not just her life, but her presence in Manhattan's corporate and social elite. Her victories over Andrew Calder and Chloe Vane were no longer news, they were history. Now, her focus turned to something larger, creating a lasting legacy, a personal brand that would ensure her influence and power endured far beyond immediate triumphs. Emma began the day reviewing plans for a series of high-profile initiatives. She would launch a philanthropic foundation, supporting single mothers, navigating corporate environments, a cause close to her heart and intimately connected to her own journey. Strategically, this effort would elevate her image, showcasing her intelligence, leadership, and compassion simultaneously. Media outlets had already expressed interest, intrigued by a figure who had not only survived betrayal but turned adversity into empowerment. Every press release, every interview, and every public appearance would reinforce Emma's reputation as a formidable, respected leader. Meanwhile, her business empire was expanding. Investors who had once hesitated were now eager to align with her ventures. Emma personally oversaw major contracts, acquisitions, and partnerships, ensuring that every move reflected integrity and strategic foresight. She spent hours mentoring, promising young professionals, particularly women in finance and tech, fostering loyalty and admiration. Her influence extended beyond boardrooms, She was shaping Manhattan's future leaders, securing both power and legacy in equal measure. Ethan Mercer, ever her partner in strategy, remained by her side. Their relationship, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared victories, had evolved naturally into something deeper. While Ethan had once been a discreet ally, he now participated fully in Emma's vision, offering insight, guidance, and unwavering support. Their partnership symbolized not only personal happiness but also professional synergy, demonstrating that Emma's triumphs were multifaceted, both intimate and publicly significant. Oliver, growing quickly and brimming with curiosity, became a living testament to Emma's journey. His presence reminded her that every decision, every calculated risk, and every public confrontation was not only for herself but for the family she cherished. He observed her with wide eyes as she worked, learning lessons of resilience, strategy, and integrity that would shape his own understanding of the world. Emma knew that by investing in her legacy and personal brand, she was also investing in his future, ensuring that he would inherit both security and inspiration. As the day drew on, Emma reviewed social media analytics and press coverage. Every article, every feature, every social mention reflected her growing authority. Manhattan's elite no longer questioned her, they respected her. Invitations to global business forums, philanthropic galas, and leadership panels poured in. Emma's image was carefully curated, confident, intelligent, compassionate, and unshakable. Each decision reinforced her brand, consolidating a reputation built on strategy, perseverance, and authenticity. By evening, Emma stood on her penthouse terrace, Oliver asleep in Ethan's arms, the city sprawling below. She reflected on the journey every betrayal, every challenge, every victory had built this moment. Her power was no longer reactive, it was proactive, enduring, and far-reaching. Emma Calder had become a force of influence, a beacon of leadership, and the embodiment of triumph. And as the Manhattan skyline glittered before her, she knew that the story of her life, one of resilience, strategy, and unshakable strength, was only beginning to inspire others. The evening skyline of Manhattan sparkled like a sea of diamonds as Emma Calder entered the prestigious Ascend Leadership Gala. Every step she took in her tailored sapphire gown was deliberate, calculated to command attention without arrogance. The room was filled with influential investors, CEOs, and socialites, all accustomed to power plays and social maneuvering, but tonight, the power had shifted entirely. Emma was no longer just a participant, she was the authority. Inside, the hum of polite conversation paused as heads turned. Emma's presence carried the weight of her journey, months of strategy, confrontation, and personal resilience, reflected in her posture, her calm expression, and the subtle confidence in her stride. Andrew Calder, seated awkwardly in a corner with a few remaining allies, cast nervous glances, realizing that the empire he once believed untouchable had fully transitioned into Emma's hands. Chloe Vane, conspicuously absent, was replaced by whispers of her retreat from Manhattan's elite circles. Emma approached the central stage where the gala's host, a respected industry luminary, began introducing a special recognition. "Tonight, we honor leaders who have transformed not only their companies but their communities," the host announced. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and the audience leaned in. Emma's name was called, and applause erupted, not perfunctory, but genuine, acknowledging her intellect, perseverance, and integrity. She walked to the stage with her baby bump subtly visible beneath the gown, a symbol of personal and professional triumph. The first part of her speech emphasized strategy and resilience. "Leadership," Emma began, her voice clear and resonant, "is not about titles or wealth. It is about integrity, foresight, and the courage to make difficult decisions. Challenges test our character, and it is how we respond that defines our legacy." Every word reinforced her authority, earning nods and murmurs of admiration. Manhattan's elite were witnessing the culmination of a narrative that had begun with betrayal and humiliation, but had evolved into empowerment and respect. Then came the twist that left the audience breathless. Emma announced a groundbreaking partnership between Mercer Global and her newly formed foundation, designed to empower young women navigating corporate hierarchies. Media flashes captured the moment as she revealed that Ethan Mercer would serve as an advisory figure, solidifying their professional and personal alliance. The subtle implication that Emma's power was not just inherited, but actively expanding through strategy, influence, and mentorship sent ripples through the room. Investors leaned closer, intrigued by the innovative fusion of social responsibility and corporate expansion. Andrew's presence, though limited, became a spectacle. Journalists and guests whispered about his dwindling influence, contrasting sharply with Emma's growing empire. Every attempt he might have made to regain control was neutralized before it could even materialize. Emma's mastery over both narrative and perception ensured that she was seen as not just a survivor, but a visionary, someone who turned adversity into opportunity, strategy into power, and personal pain into lasting impact. After the speech, Emma mingled discreetly with key partners, reinforcing alliances and establishing new contacts. Ethan remained beside her, a quiet yet undeniable presence of support and shared ambition. Oliver, safe at home under the care of a trusted nanny, was a reminder that her victories were not only professional, they were deeply personal. Emma's empire was thriving, her reputation untouchable, and her family secure. As the gala concluded and the city lights shimmered beyond the windows, Emma Calder smiled subtly, aware that every challenge had been a step toward this defining moment. Andrew Calder's era was over, and Manhattan would remember her not as a victim, but as the woman who transformed betrayal into a legacy of power, influence, and enduring respect. Yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, a final twist awaited, one that would cement her dominance completely. The soft glow of the Manhattan evening reflected across the river as Emma Calder stepped onto the terrace of her Mercer Global penthouse. The city stretched endlessly beneath her, sparkling like a constellation of victories and opportunities. Every challenge, every betrayal, every moment of humiliation had led to this definitive moment. Andrew Calder's downfall was complete. He had lost his influence, credibility, and every ally he had once relied on. Chloe Vane was nowhere to be found, her ambitions dissolved alongside Andrew's crumbling empire. Emma, however, had ascended to a position of unassailable power. Oliver ran across the plush carpet of the penthouse, laughter bubbling like music. Emma's heart swelled as she watched her son play with Ethan Mercer, who had become not only a trusted ally but a steadfast presence in their family. The journey from betrayal and despair to security and love had been long, but the reward was undeniable. Emma's family, her power, and her reputation were now intact, protected, and thriving. Every strategic decision, every calculated move had been validated. Earlier that day, Manhattan's financial and social elite had witnessed another confirmation of Emma's authority. Key investors attended a private briefing where she unveiled a bold expansion plan for Mercer Global, combining philanthropic initiatives with innovative corporate strategy. Her reputation for intelligence, foresight, and integrity was solidified. Andrew had attempted to challenge her influence once more, but every effort was anticipated, countered, and neutralized. The story of his fall was complete, the narrative of Emma's triumph undeniable. Emma allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the countless nights she had cried, the moments of doubt when Andrew's betrayal seemed insurmountable, and the small victories that had accumulated into this final triumph. Each setback had become an opportunity, every tear a catalyst for strategy and resilience. The woman who once felt powerless and abandoned had transformed into a leader, a mother, and a figure of respect. Her life was no longer dictated by Andrew's choices, it was entirely her own. As evening deepened, Emma stepped onto the balcony with Ethan by her side and Oliver nestled in her arms. The skyline stretched endlessly, illuminated by the lights of the city she now dominated both socially and professionally. Ethan's quiet strength and unwavering support had been instrumental, but Emma recognized that the ultimate victory was hers earned through intelligence, perseverance, and courage. Together, they watched as Manhattan shimmered below, a city now bearing witness to her story of transformation and triumph. Oliver giggled, pointing toward the skyline. "Mommy, Daddy, look," he exclaimed. Emma and Ethan exchanged a glance, their smiles soft yet triumphant. The child's innocence and joy were reminders of what truly mattered, the life she had rebuilt, the family she had protected, and the legacy she had secured. Emma's hand rested lightly on her baby bump, a symbol of the life still growing and the future she would continue to shape with wisdom and love. The final piece of closure came with an unexpected message from one of Andrew's former associates, a small acknowledgement of his complete loss, the irony of his downfall, highlighting every calculated step Emma had taken. She smiled faintly, a mixture of satisfaction and quiet amusement. Manhattan had witnessed the complete arc: betrayal, struggle, strategic triumph, and ultimate justice. Emma Calder's life was no longer reactive. It was a legacy, a model of power, resilience, and personal fulfillment. And as the city lights sparkled like stars beneath her, Emma Calder held Oliver close, Ethan at her side, and allowed herself to feel the full measure of victory. Every betrayal had been repaid, every strategy executed flawlessly, and every personal and professional goal realized. She had emerged unbroken, unshakable, and wholly triumphant, a woman who had conquered adversity, protected her family, and claimed her destiny in every way. So, the story has come to an end, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me right now, it tells me something. It means something in this story has touched your heart in a way you can't ignore. Let's take a moment to look at it together. Emma's journey wasn't just about revenge or winning against betrayal. It was about resilience, about transforming pain into strength, and about reclaiming control over the life you deserve. Life will throw challenges, heartbreaks, and moments where you feel powerless, but like Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Emma didn't wait for luck or others to save her. She acted, learned, and persevered. And that's a lesson for all of us. Healing doesn't happen by avoiding pain. It happens by facing it, strategizing through it, and keeping your heart open to love and trust along the way. So, if this story resonates with you, remember to embrace your inner strength, cherish your loved ones, and never let betrayal define your future. And hey, if this touched you, like, share, and subscribe, because we're in this journey together and there's more inspiration to come.
The divorce papers were signed in silence, her tears the only sound marking the end of a marriage built on disappointment and betrayal. The CEO walked away believing she would collapse without him, certain she had nowhere else to go. But fate had a different plan. Months later, at a prestigious event, he froze when he heard a small voice call out, "Dad!" Turning, he saw her son, confident, well-dressed, and standing beside a billionaire who rested a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. The CEO's breath caught as he whispered, "Is that really him?" The woman he once underestimated had rebuilt her life with dignity, finding a man who treated her child as his own. In that moment, the CEO realized a truth he never imagined. The family he failed had found someone far better to take his place.